name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Friday, October 22nd, 2010, and we're at the OSU Alumni Center for Homecoming today with Mim Roth. And this interview is being conducted as part of the O State Stories Oral History Project of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. And Mim is here today because she's celebrating her 50th class reunion, right?
Right.
Wow, that's so amazing. Welcome back to campus today.
Thank you.
Well, Mim, I want to learn a little bit more about you. Could you tell me where you're from originally?
I was born in South Dakota, and in a tiny little town that didn't even have more than 200 people. My dad was a Lutheran minister, and so I spent the first 9 years there, and then he moved to Nebraska to a country parish, and that was in northeastern Nebraska. Wausau was the mailing address. And there I went to a one-room schoolhouse from 4th through 8th grade, and then a consolidated high school, which took in all these small little districts of the one-room schoolhouses. And my graduating class was 29, so it was a pretty small kind of environment that I got my basic education in. And then my dad moved to Oklahoma when I was a senior in high school, but I stayed up there, boarded with a friend, graduated with my class, and then moved down to Oklahoma. And there I went to work for Southwestern Bell for 15 months so that I could provide funds for going to college. And I got a scholarship here to Oklahoma State, but at that time it was Oklahoma A&M. And my first semester's tuition, and I could take as many courses as I wanted to, as many hours, was $178. But that was a big sum for me, just because it all came from savings. But then I worked at the dean's office in agriculture for Dr. Randall Jones, and I worked all 4 years there. And my salary was 50 cents an hour. And so if I could get squeeze in 20 hours a week, I was really, doing well. So between scholarships and working on campus and then working summers, I graduated with $300 debt, and I made it through college because everything was so much less expensive, including, the work wages for 50 cents an hour. That was still within a doable kind of thing. But I earned 75 cents an hour by the time I was a senior, so I was really in the money. So that's, really the story of where I was born, then middle school, and then college. So.
Well, let's back up just a tiny bit. That 15 months you worked before coming to Oklahoma A&M, were you a telephone operator?
No, I worked in the engineering department in Oklahoma City for Southwestern Bell. And there I really got to kind of know that there were so many little towns in Oklahoma, because I kept record of the different exchanges and any kind of problems that they had, we would process and give to our engineers. Our chief engineer would, supervise that whole kind of thing. So I was, I had learned the secretarial arts in high school. And that really benefited me because the typing and shorthand and all those kinds of things gave me my career of, supporting, getting to have these jobs that I could earn money at. So that's what I did.
So you go, essentially, I know it changed, from a one-room schoolhouse to Oklahoma A&M.
Right.
Kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
What was Stillwater like for you?
Stillwater was, to me, just kind of on the fringes of my life, because my life was so centered on the campus. And we would, I did join a sorority, and I didn't know what on earth a sorority was, but I lived in Murray Hall my freshman year. And then they rushed me when it was open rush, like the second semester. And so I pledged Pi Beta Phi, and there were some town girls including Melinda Berry, and I got to know her. It was kind of like there, but not part of our life so much, except when as a sorority we would go to church together. We always had one Sunday a year, I guess, designated as the girls would all go to church together. We wore our gloves, our hats, and that kind of thing. And there was a dress shop called Bonnie's that was, if you could afford it, I mean, it would be like you really arrived in fashion if you got to go to Bonnie's and pick out something. So those were kind of some impressions. Off campus, there was something called the Corral, and you could go there for hamburgers and that kind of thing. You were actually not too far from campus, but you could go there. So it was not, it didn't figure in very heavily for me as a student. But I recognized that was a town and gown kind of operation, and I did belong to a student Lutheran organization, and I'm not real sure if I remember the name of it, but anyhow, then I would go to church there and participate in that kind of a town and gown kind of thing. But everything else was so centered on the Ocali and what was happening on student politics and campus life, and of course my studies, because I was very serious about my studies, and that served me well.
Well, speaking about your studies, what was your major?
My major was in the education school. I was going to be a teacher, a secondary school teacher, and my concentration was in English, and secondary was in speech. And it turns out that that's exactly what I did. I taught English and speech in high school and college. And then when I was in the university, I taught communications, which is a broader kind of thing. And so that was a wonderful field. I loved it because it kept me so in touch with what was going on in our pop culture and in our political scene and in the students' lives, because they all had to take, I taught a lot of public speaking, and the students were so scared. And it turns out that on the list of anxieties, that public speaking comes in either number 1 or number 2 with fears, the Celia kind of, scale of fears, that I was able to talk to these kids, and we created kind of a family in our classroom, so that listening was as important as speaking, and supporting the speaker was as important as how you could speak. So it was a supportive kind of classroom that I always tried to do, and it was so important in their lives. Whatever they were going to do, they were going to use public speaking, and these were lots of teacher preparation students at Concordia University in the Chicago area, in River Forest. So I used my education in what I ended up doing. I did, however, go on to get my master's from Northwestern University in speech. And so that was the preparation that I got for my later teaching.
Well, back here on campus, any memorable classes or instructors that really stand out for you?
I had one teacher whose name was Dr. Samuel Woods. I believe that's his name. Dr. Wood or Woods, I'm not real sure. But we went to class in Old Central, and he was an English teacher. And under him, I took the mystery of the English language. It was really called the history of the English language, but it was so difficult that we traced where the English came from, Old English, Middle English, to modern English, and the changes that took place in the structure of the language itself. And he kind of stood out for me as being so knowledgeable, not personable particularly, but knowing what it was and how this whole thing developed, that I found it a fascinating kind of thing. I probably would have been a history major if I hadn't been, involved in knowing I needed to have something I could use as a career and earn my living. But that gave me real appreciation for history and how it all unfolds and so on. What else stood out? I think that I thought the caliber of the teacher was quite high, that they were dedicated to what they were trying to teach us, that they had done a great deal of scholarship to prepare themselves for what it was. And I thought that this was a good place. There was a Dr. Agnew who was a history teacher, and he was extraordinary with his ability to talk about the importance of the events as they related to the culture of the country and the world, and introduced us to a lot of scholarship in terms of bibliography and in finding sources, primary sources, secondary sources. And I always thought that that was really good. He, I thought, was tops. I really, really enjoyed what his courses were all about. I was also very involved in the campus life and in the political life of the campus and in the social life through the sorority. And there I met lots of kids who were talented and were fun to be around and to know and gain some insights.
Well, politically, did you serve on student senate?
Yes, I was a junior senator, senator from the junior class.
And tell me about running for office. What was that like?
Well, you just had to kind of know a lot of people and get them together, and we passed out flyers, and I figured out that if you knew people who were in charge of various student organizations and that they would support you, that they in turn would be the ones who could spread the word. Mm-hmm. And they were likely to know people who would go actually vote. And so I thought, well, that was, and I think it turned out that way, that's how it was. We didn't have rallies, as far as I know, or conventions or speeches. I think we did have like a candidates' night or something, which was very sparsely attended. It was basically who you knew, who they knew, and a networking kind of thing to get on there if you really wanted to do that. And I loved it. I thought it was really fun.
Were there any hot button topics that came up during your term as a student senator?
You'll laugh at this. This is one of those startling memories that I have. Oklahoma State was, until my senior year, Oklahoma A&M. And my class in 60 was the first graduating class as the diploma, Oklahoma State University. So I went to, pre and beginning of the change. And we also joined in the athletic conference from the Missouri Valley to the Big Eight that we were asked to participate in. And I think it was my junior year when I was a senator that Oklahoma State's wrestling team won the national championship. It was Myron Roderick. And we thought that that was so important because we were going to be Oklahoma State, and this was a national championship, and that it deserved a day of suspension of classes. No one should go. We should all rally and have a wonderful celebration. So the Student Senate voted to suspend classes. Now, we had no authority to do that, and we knew that, but we figured that we could put the pressure on, and we called in Oklahoma City's TV stations, declared this was a day that we didn't have to go to school. No students have to go to school. And we almost got suspended from the university because Dean Baker did not like this at all, as he had to report to Oliver Wenholm and all the academic council that student senate that he was supposed to be the advisor to had just declared a class holiday. And we had to go in front, Some of them didn't go to school. The professors were like, well, they were going to hold classes anyhow. I mean, they did. But the majority of students didn't go to class. Mm-hmm. Then how is that going to work out with their grades? And how is that going to work out with attendance? And so then we were called in to face the academic council and to present our case of defense as to why we did this. And we did so, and it turned out that we were neither penalized nor suspended nor dealt with in anything but, well, I suppose you overstepped your bounds and you thought more of yourself than more power than you really had. But it was so heady as a endeavor that that stands out to me as really something that was kind of like a firebrand, and it was just fun, really exciting. I remember that. Another thing I remember was walking across campus, and I don't remember if this was, I should check it out, but I think it was the fall of my freshman year, and we heard that Sputnik had gone up. The Russians had put up Sputnik, and we were really taken by that and embarrassed, I think, that the United States, fearful of that race that was going on between Russia and the Soviet Union, really, and the United States. And Churchill had already declared the Iron Curtain, in his speech down in Missouri many years before, but this was just post-atomic bomb kind of warnings where we always had to crawl under the desks and have drills, and now all of a sudden here it was, they had Sputnik and that satellite, they could see everything and do all, and we didn't have it. And so that was a significant kind of sobering of where we were in the arms race, even though no one called it the arms race so much at that point. But it was an achievement that outdid the United States in the scientific endeavor. And we really talked about it a lot. The student Oak Legion had headlines and so on, but we as students, at least the ones I hung around with, thought it was a significant thing in history. And I think it was.
Sure.
I think then John Kennedy in '60 did that, we're going to land a man on the moon. And we weren't much beyond, at that point, Sputnik stuff. And he did it. And then I remember sitting on the couch, I had a little baby, and when Neil Armstrong announced, one step for mankind, great leap for mankind. And it was in my lifetime that I got to see that landing on the moon, they didn't sink way down into the soil or just to disappear. Because as laymen, I didn't know enough about what kind of conditions were on the moon with all the myths that had tested.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
But that was, I think, a link to I think it was 1957, to the landing on the moon, that this was great technological advances that were just going at the speed of light. And the Atoms for Peace that Eisenhower had pushed was in effect at the time Sputnik went up, and we hadn't done anything, at least as far as a layman would be concerned. So those are two things that I thought influenced my view of the world, opened it up to both fears and triumph.
Oh, yeah. Well, sorority life?
Sorority life was wonderful. I told you I didn't know anything about sororities. We had a rural high school kind of thing in Nebraska, came down, and all the girls apparently had gone through like Rush. And I didn't know what Rush was. They kept talking about Rush when I got on campus. Are you going to Rush? Well, the Rush season was over at that point in the fall, because they did that before school started. But then after the start of the second semester, then they could have open Rush for people who, they could pick up people. So I said, well, I don't know, I guess I could join a sorority if I, thought that was the right thing to do. Never really considering that it was quite competitive and that you had to, be good material for your sororities and stuff. But I had, my end of my first year in college, I had won 3.75 grade point average. And the second semester, which I guess really counted at the end of the first year, I had a 4.0. So academically, I was, probably pretty good material. And then I got to know a lot of people on campus quite early, and so socially it was like, okay, sure, why not? What I really found is that I had some wonderful friends, and it was a community for me to thrive in as friendships and sociability, and to meet guys, because they had, as an independent, you had the snowball ball or the snowflake ball or something like that, that was where you could get a formal and you could have a date and then corsage and stuff. But in the sorority, they set up a lot of kinds of exchanges. And so I thought that was pretty neat. And then we changed roommates all the time when living in the house, and you got to know your fellow sisters. And it was a chance for leadership, and that I exerted that kind of thing, and grew. I grew a lot in college in terms intellectually and socially, and I think awareness of life in the world, because I came from a pretty sheltered kind of background. And I found that many of the girls did too.
Sure.
They came from rural areas and they hadn't had these huge kinds of opportunities.
Any social events with your sorority that really stand out, that you could say, I remember the such and such dance and this happened?
Not really. There were just so many. I was so busy. I probably never went to sleep earlier than 2 o'clock in the morning, because I worked every afternoon, tried to get my schedule so that I could take my classes in the morning and then work at the dean's office in the afternoon. And then I had my social life, student life, I should say, and then I have all my scholarship and all the schoolwork and studying. And so I was never a really big partier. I had never had anything beyond a Coke and rum, I guess, was the only drink that I had ever had, and I didn't like that.
Do you remember your house mom?
Yes, Allison. What was her name? Allison. She was Miss. We called her Mom Ellison. I can't remember her last name. She was a gentle Southern woman who presided at dinner every night, and we had to dress for dinner. I mean, we couldn't come down in warm-ups or anything like that. And then we sang during the dinner time, and we had formal setting. And she really was the overseer of our social graces. And she had a suite in our house, and she was really a wonderful person. I never, went in and cried on her shoulder or anything like that, but lots of girls did, and she was a substitute mother for them. But I thought that she did a wonderful job of manners and appropriate behavior, and made sure that the house was dignified. And it was not a raunchy place. We had a lot of laughs and we did a lot of fun things, but it was, that was a good thing. Living in the house was good.
Curfew?
Curfew. We had proctors that we elected or appointed, yes, elected, and they locked the doors during the week at 11 o'clock in the evening. On Friday night, I think it went to 12. Saturday night, maybe 12:30 or 1 in the morning. And then Sunday back again to early time, like 11 o'clock. Now, if you didn't sign out and had the permission to come in late because of whatever event, or you at home or whatever, you were in pretty serious trouble for not making curfew. How widespread that was campus-wide, I think it was pretty widespread with houses. And when we were in Murray Hall, I was a freshman, it was 8 o'clock.
Wow.
Unless you could sign out to go to the library, and you can come in at 9 o'clock. But on weekends, then that was 11 o'clock kind of thing and so on. I'm not sure about exact time. But boy, I made sure I would go to the library, and meet up with, future boyfriends or somebody who you really wanted to date or, so on. And that was all part of the, I'd say, the intrigue of the curfew stuff. That it was important, and it's opportunities, you can always find opportunities in that. And it did give a sense of order and control. It was not a free-for-all. Of course, guys couldn't come beyond calling up from the lobby and asking, if you were ready or so-and-so's here and that kind of thing. A lot different than subsequently what's happened in terms of, what would I say, a wide open kind of lack of restraints and constraints of young people today. Mm-hmm. Everything is available to them, and it doesn't seem to be that there are these bare parameters that gave you a lot of strength and a lot of safety. And of course we railed against it. We didn't think that was fair, that we had to be in at 8 o'clock at night. And of course there was no drinking. Oklahoma was a dry state. And that limited the kind of bashes that you read about in sorority and fraternity life.
Bootleggers?
Yeah. There were bootleggers from the standpoint that the fraternities would go up to Kansas line. Now, I don't know which city they would go, but right across the line. And they could bring back liquor if they could get away with it without the police, the sheriffs, catching them. And they would have some hard liquor and beer always available, but it was pretty well kept under wrap, and you didn't have any kegs, and you didn't have open drinking or smoking. It was all surreptitious.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm guessing you were a very good student. I'm guessing. Were you?
I was.
Okay. I heard a little bird told me you won an award and you edged out somebody for this award. I want to hear the story about this award.
The Alumni Association instituted an award for the outstanding student of the graduating class. And there were nominees, and my name was submitted as a nominee. So we had an interview process. You submitted paperwork, with your record of what you were involved in and your school grade points and that kind of thing. And I don't know how many of us were interviewed. I knew Wes, I knew Jill Roberts, and there were a couple other people. So I'm guessing probably maybe a cohort of 6 people from whom they were really kind of looking at. And so these were advisors or trustees from the college and from the Alumni Association, these men. And I think there were maybe 3 men who were on this committee, and you can check the record to see who it was at that time. But one of the men, they asked me different questions, and I could respond to them. And of course, I had been taking speech classes, and so as I kind of had an edge in public speaking or in maybe perhaps interviewing. But one of the gentlemen asked me, he said, I've always had a favorite poem, and I'd like for you to quote that poem for me. Do you know this poem? And I said, well, what is it? And he said, for whom the bells toll. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? I have read it. I don't know that I have studied it as a genre, but I cannot quote that. I don't know that by heart. And I said, when I leave, I will go look that up and double check it. And so I thought, that's it. Goodbye. There goes my chances. And I was really shocked and surprised that when I got a telephone call that I had been selected as the outstanding graduate, because I thought I didn't know everything. And later on I was talking to somebody and they said that's probably the best answer you could get. If you didn't know it cold and you couldn't quote it, then just to tell them you didn't know it. And I said, well, I just responded because that's I didn't know, I couldn't quote it. And it was Tennyson who had written that poem. And then the man who asked me that, he went on to quote that poem, recite that poem. And so I thought, well, okay, there it goes.
And there you have it.
And there you have it. Yeah. It was a very big honor. And my parents were not demonstrative about my accolades. And I had achieved a lot of, at least in schooling, I had gotten a lot of scholarships and I'd gotten a lot of citation kind of things over the years. And I just thought, well, that's nice. I mean, I think Mom and Dad will like that or so on. I wasn't sure that they would pay too much attention to it. And I got a certificate. It was a beautiful certificate, outstanding in action. I have it now, but Mom and Dad framed it and put it up in Dad's study. And when he had visitors and guests, he would point out, that's my daughter. So I found out something about Mom and Dad too, that they didn't say too much about what kinds of achievements or accolades their kids got. And my brothers and sisters all were really quite accomplished and so on. But that they did enjoy what their children had earned and received. So it has a special place in my heart for having that.
Well, what was graduation like?
We graduated outside at the stadium, and it was hotter than blazes. And we just went by college. We sat in, outside in rows and so on, and listened to speeches. And I couldn't tell you who was the speaker or even what they said. But I knew that it was a significant day in my life and that it was a breaking point because I was going to move from being a student, which I had been all my life, well, except for, working all the time, but to a career or a profession. And I wasn't real sure at that point where I was going to teach. And I hadn't selected any of the school districts at that point where I wanted to go for sure. But I did know my little sister in the sorority, her dad was a business manager in Oceanside, California schools. And he had been on campus a couple times and he thought I would make a wonderful addition to their high school staff. So I went out there. I had looked at the salary schedule and it was $3,600 a year, which was very high among the schools that had bulletin boards in the education department, and you could sign up for interviews because they would come, representatives of the school districts would come and interview prospective teachers. Instead of you just picking up, putting in an application, you could actually have an interview. So I knew my life was going to change. I was pretty sure I would be going out to California. And having been only in South Dakota, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, and then I had never been on an airplane, and I knew I would be flying, and so I took my first airplane ride in June, after I graduated in May, to Los Angeles in a 4-engine plane, prop plane, and landed, and the people, Barbara's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Gabriel, Mrs. Gabriel came to Los Angeles airport, picked me up, and drove me back to Oceanside. And it is probably about 60, 70 miles south of Los Angeles, and I could smell the ocean. And I thought, oh, this really is going to be a different life. We stopped at a diner. I was hungry, and Ruth introduced me, that's mother, to cheesecake. I'd never had cheesecake before. She said, would you like a piece of cheesecake and a cup of coffee? I'd learned how to drink coffee in college, but somehow never had cheesecake. And I didn't like cheese that much, but I thought, well, I'm her guest. And she seemed so enthusiastic. She said, I'm going to order that. Okay, I said, I will too. I loved it. It was This is just creamy and wonderful. So there were all kinds of new things waiting for me in the wings, and it was an exciting time.
And how long were you in California?
2 years I taught, and then I went to Northwestern. And I knew that I would only be teaching a couple of years before I would get my advanced degree. And then I didn't know where I would go from there. But I knew that if I wanted to be, I did teach in junior college as well as high school. And I knew if I wanted to continue, and I would want to teach in college, I would need my master's, besides I wanted it. And I got a really nice fellowship at Northwestern. So I went there. And when I was there, I met my husband, and that's changed my whole life. And so, not changed it, but that cemented that I was going to be in Illinois, and I was going to have a family, I thought. And it was great.
Well, we're kind of winding down on time, and I want to ask you, I find this often with alumni interview, but what is it about Oklahoma State that sparks such loyalty in alumni?
I think that when I was in school here, I met friends who were all engaged in the same endeavor, and that was to learn, to expand our horizons. I met professors who inspired me to reach, it's a cliche, reach for the stars or go beyond yourself. There wasn't the phrase outside the box thinking at that point, but it was implied that you always learned. It was a lifetime kind of learning that a real student would always find challenging and appropriate for their life. I think there was an authenticity about the people, both as the faculty and as the student body. They came to life with an honesty that didn't seem to be put on, shallow, superficial. Whatever it was that they were involved in, did it with gusto. I think that was the student body. And more or less humble, not given to airs. And I liked that. I liked that kind of surrounding. It was wholesome. And I felt as though this was a great place to grow and to be something more than what you started out with. So I think you really think that that's a special kind of place. And I know my husband feels that his place where he went to school had those attributes as well. So it was a successful college experiment, and that stays with you the rest. And I always look for people with authenticity, where it comes from within, and confidence that, yes, this is what I believe, and this is what I will do. And there are integrity and moral aspects to that I saw exhibited as a student. So perhaps those would be my reflections on what was so wonderful about Oklahoma State. Sometimes I still call it Oklahoma A&M, the Aggies.
Well, I hear that often too. Mm-hmm. I mean, some people are torn, mm-hmm. And some people use it interchangeably, yes. Oklahoma State with Oklahoma A&M. It's all the same though. It's still...
Yeah, it's the institution and the ongoing culture of real people mm-hmm. in real situations. That's what I liked. And I'm not so sure you find that in lots of other institutions, not just, higher education, but in other institutions that we have in our society.
Well, we kind of fast forwarded through your life here at Oklahoma A&M and Oklahoma State yes. to present day. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close out today's interview?
I suppose one more thing, and that would be my experiment with Greek life, and that has been a very strong continuum in the alumni chapters, and that no matter where I go, I meet up with and enjoy added friendships and continuing friendships with the members of Pi Beta Phi. I belong to 2 clubs right now, one in Illinois and one out in California. And it always just seems as though the same kind of things that I was part of and interested in as a student, the kind of people that they were. They're engaging, they're widely read, they are have been involved in their communities and are involved in the communities, and that's a really strong tie back to Oklahoma State, because that's what I experienced it as an active. And now as an alumni, I think that's been a really good gift that I had, and I attributed that I came to Oklahoma State, and that's where I found it.
Well, we welcome you back for your 50th reunion, and thank you so much for taking time out to talk with us today.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.